Dungeon Masters of Reddit, what is the most useless item you gave your party that they were still able to exploit?
Bagpipes of invisibility. They grant invisibility as long as they're played. Silence is one hell of a spell.
I gave my players a pig whistle. Once a day, they could blow the whistle and summon a pig. I hadn't given too much thought about it, but they used it constantly. They would send pigs off to spring traps. They would have impromptu luau's to curry favor with peasants. They never had to worry about rations again. Pork for dinner. I thought it was just a useless throwaway item, but they sure proved me wrong. Good times.
One time our DM gave us a Rod of Summon boat as a joke, except we rolled a nat 20 for the summon and got a whole ass galleon. The campaign quickly became pirate-themed as we became privateers.
Player here. Once upon a time I was playing a supernatural western game and we received a magic bullet, early on that, when dropped onto the ground, will point in the direction of true north. We received this bullet in session 1 and promptly forgot it existed. We then went on a 2-year-long campaign of tracking down an evil time-traveling wizard with antics that included poisoning a bunch of rich people with ice cream, crashing a zeppelin, a player character going insane and trying murder his way to the presidency, fighting a train monster, then finally confronting the evil wizard in a pocket dimension. We were, somehow, woefully underprepared to fight the bathrobe-wearing wizard as he was immune to all forms of damage. We were at a loss to what to do, until the wizard shouted that he can only be hurt by magic. We paused and looked at our inventories for a few minutes. Suddenly my buddy shoves his character sheet in my face and points out the word, magic bullet. We then proceeded to shoot the boss in the face, killing him instantly. Our GM was reasonably upset since we were too stupid to figure out his puzzle fight and just cheesed the final boss of a 2-year campaign. But, in the end, it was our most memorable climax to a campaign.
The jar of endless lard. I put it in as a joke and somehow they managed to set a forest in fire with a timed fuse. Also having them covering various body parts in said lard just to set it in fire for extra damage wasn't good.
Father of a DM here. During lockdown our 24-year-old son was living at home, so couldn't play with his usual crew, so we agreed to Sunday morning family D&D sessions and actually quite enjoyed it. His mum was a cook who had a magic ladle that could produce any liquid. I asked if she could throw the contents. He said it would have a 5 meters range. He was expecting her to produce a healing soup, and he had to Google hydrofluoric acid when I said she should lob that at some kobolds.
Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I've been looking for an excuse to tell this story. I had a party of wizard, ranger, druid, summoner and barbarian back in Pathfinder 1e. All of the party members except for the barbarian had some kind of pet, be it an animal companion, familiar, or just the menagerie of animals the druid accumulated. A few sessions in, and my barbarian sends me a text while the party's setting up camp. The barbarian volunteers to take a watch, and the next morning the rest of the party wakes up to the barbarian's new pet, Brock Darrock. Brock was a stone with eyes and a mouth crudely carved into him. Brock goes on adventures with the party and is mostly forgotten about until a premature fight with that arc's end boss. The boss wipes the floor with the party, leaving everyone unconscious except the barbarian who has single-digit HP. Not wanting to turnpike, and with the boss in surprisingly worse shape than I expected, I have him taunt the barbarian and start to fly away. Brock is going to take his attack, the barbarian says, throwing his pet with all his might. Crit. Max damage on the roll, boss drops to -1 hit points and faceplants at the barbarian's feet for the coup de grace, also performed by Brock to finish what he started. And that's how our party's pet rock gained a temporary flight speed of 40 feet, and, favored enemy, verbose sorcerers.
One of the players had gotten married to a pretty young NPC who wasn't an adventurer. So I gave him a ring of conjugal visits that would transport him to his wife for an hour, then send him back to the adventuring group. The ring worked twice a week and was intended as a joke. When the party was beaten up from a hard combat, he used the ring and asked his wife where the nearest temple was, then bought healing potions from the local cleric. Soon this became a thing. Cure disease, healing, whatever. The ring became this guy's quick trip to the pharmacy, although he also always found a few moments for a quickie with his wife. Eventually he woke the up cleric at 3 a.m. to buy more potions. So I had the cleric throw a fit and yell at him never to come back. The player went back anyway, and the next time there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost.
We had a rock that if you were knocked out with it, you were completely invulnerable while unconscious. You had to successfully hit yourself or whoever and take damage from being knocked unconscious from a rock to the skull. That rock caused so much chaos, and death, and life, and permanent head trauma to NPCs we were trying to rescue.
I gave them a folding boat. Say a magic word and the small shoebox magically expands into a boat. Not 5 minutes later, IRL, the fricking rogue has thrown this box from the roof and said the magic word, creating the only instance of 20 dice rolls I've ever had to do. I don't know raw rules as written, or RI rules as intended. If this is allowed, but damn it, throwing a boat at people is too damn fun to not allow it.
Not mine, but the question reminded me of this post by you, Nicoberg. I created an NPC werewolf character that was supposed to be a major villain in the campaign and stalk the players. It was a higher level than the PCs, so the idea was that they would need to flee every encounter and take measures to avoid being followed. Having someone on their tail constantly tracking them that could and would actually kill them was supposed to inject a sense of urgency into the game. On the first encounter, the werewolf was shown methodically slaying a large group of town guards and a high-ranking paladin. The characters were around level 5 or so, the NPC was probably County Route 12 and would scale as they leveled. They interrupted the combat, and the idea was that they would attempt to fight the werewolf, who didn't consider them a threat initially, and so wouldn't just murder the whole party, see it killing a high-level character, and go, oh crap, we need to run from it, while it slaughtered the rest of the guards. So at first, they rush in to help and attack the werewolf, doing little damage because they don't have silver weapons, and I gave this particular NPC a regeneration ability only stopped by silver. I have the werewolf attack one of the players with a secondary bite attack, which should put them to fairly low health without killing them outright. That player pauses for a moment, and then asks if he can try to block the attack with his hand. I'm not sure what he's getting at, but I humor him and say he can do that with a District of Columbia 10 dexterity check, although it won't affect what kind of damage he takes. He succeeds. He then asks if he can jam his hand into the werewolf's mouth. I say, sure, but he's probably going to bite it off, and you'll need a new hand. He says, even better. I describe the werewolf doing so. The rest of combat continues until the player's turn, who seems undisturbed by the loss of a hand, and on his turn he says, I activate Qual's feather token to make a tree. This token is a magic one-time use item that creates a 5-foot diameter, 40-foot high tree. It's a handy utility item that our playgroup was fond of previously. We'd used it to do things from just making bridges and crossing walls, to providing a druid with a way to use a particular spell in plant-less areas that require trees. It didn't seem to have much use here. I ask him where on the board he's activating it. He points at the werewolf. I say that the most that's going to do is knock the werewolf prone, and he gets a fairly easy save to prevent that. He smiles. No, it's in the werewolf. What? How? I was holding it when he ate my hand. Me and the rest of the party are kind of silent for a second. I'm trying to think of a valid reason why this won't work. I fail. The werewolf now has a 5-foot wide tree growing out of him. The fact that he has regeneration doesn't particularly help when little bits of him are plastered on walls 20 feet away. The entire party celebrated and they got a reward from the town and an ally in the paladin who was supposed to be dead. I had to make a new NPC. Clever players are awesome.
I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I don't remember why. They were trapped in a house fighting a zombie horde and they used the skin bag, turned it into a sort of Molotov bomb, used a spell to have it fly over the zombies, who followed the human skin away to be blown up. It was a 45-minute saga to get to that point, and it was easily the funniest and most creative moment I've seen from the DM side.
Gave the party a magic whistle that summons pigeons. The party somehow used it to murder an orc commander by turning his armor into bread, having the pigeons eat it all, and then shooting him in the face with a blast of lightning.
Not a DM, but my friend is, and he told me about a sword he gave a party. He called it the normal sword. When his players asked if there was anything special about it, all he would say is, it's just a normal sword. In practice it was so normal that it would negate all magic. His party never figured that out though.
Players. I'm sorry, but this incredibly easy and obvious puzzle can't be solved. Also players. Yes, this useless item can be used for genocide.
We used a jug of alchemy to waterboard someone with vinegar. It's also been used to create mayo.
My DM allowed our thief to own an incredibly stale baguette. We murdered and tortured so many orcs with stale bread.
Not a DM, but the last campaign I was in, the DM gave us a regenerative oasis that only appears to people that need it. The party was messing around with throwing bones in it and bringing the animals they belonged to back to life. One of the other players had the thought to throw the hat of the deceased king into the water, and brought the king back to life because of a single hair. The DM hadn't even considered that possibility, because the session was supposed to be our beach episode.
My favorite magic item my players found was a totally homebrewed item with no real productive function, but they still got creative with it. They found the pie stone. Holding this stone in your hand and concentrating will fill a 25 feet radius area with the stone as the center with the smell of a pie of your choice. This effect lasts for 10 minutes or until you dismiss the effect. The rogue used it to sneak past guard and as a distraction tactic when scouting and such.
Obligatory. I'm a player, not a DM. My DM once let me design my own weapon as reward for being the only person of 7 to show up to a session. Only rule was it had to be silly and useless. I created Archibald, the world's greatest ladies' man. He was the soul of a super charismatic elf trapped in a tiny little iron lantern. Basics: the flame was a little ghostly elf's head that would act as my wingman, but only when I tried to romance monsters. Dumb, borderline useless, and led to a lot of silly role-playing opportunities. Perfect. Then one day, months later, our party got into a fight with a hydra. No one had any caustic or flame-based attacks to cauterize the necks, so the heads kept growing back. Then our barbarian noticed that technically Archibald was a little flame, so bludgeoning the hydra with his lantern would count as burning damage. Proceeded to beat every head to pulp with a screaming elven smooth talker. Peak D&D right there.
I gave my players a chalice that, when drunk from, caused the user to sweat fat profusely. They used it to overcome a cold-based trap in the dungeon. It was a hallway that got progressively colder, so they emerge on the other end, covered in fat, into the chamber of the dungeon boss. It was a slippery fight.
I found a homebrew item someplace called a used bag of holding. It basically covers everything you put in the bag with a thin layer of glitter. One of my players took this and began scraping off the glitter and collecting it. Eventually he had enough glitter bags to where he could use animate objects on it. The little crap would have several of these bags fly around and dump their contents on people, causing great confusion as the glitter would get in their eyes and hardly come off because it was sticky.
I gave my players a torch that couldn't be lit by normal means. After 2 or 3 sessions, one of them finally asked how to light it. I had totally forgotten about it by this point, so I made the NPC mention that it could only be lit by an Elder Red Dragon's breath weapon, and once lit would burn forever. Suddenly, the entire party of 3rd and 4th level toons decides they want to veer off course and get this thing lit.
I had a bit called the bargain bin, where I would just improv something stupid, mostly stupid made up on the spot spells. My favorite was a bag of holding that held exactly as much as a bag of that volume would hold. What I didn't expect was them getting creative. They just made the bag bigger by sewing more onto it, and then rolled it up. Still cumbersome, as I forced extra turns to use the thing if they wanted to use it in combat, but was a great laugh at how they undermined my bullcrap. Since it weighs 15 pounds regardless of internal weight, it was still a tool. Frost sock. Everyone's feet became blocks of ice. They did it, and immediately nat 20 on a melee, so I went with it, caused enemies' feet to detach from their ankle and stay stuck to the floor. Swarm of flies. Just a swarm of flies, no damage. Just annoying. They used it inside a tavern to create a wild distraction, and made their own entrance into the plot-related area. Bluntify weapons. A spell that creates a magical barrier that prevents the weapon from ever making contact with anything. Has to be done while holding the weapon. So they just snuck into a guard's armory and did it with all their weapons, and then robbed a bank. I still threw them some curveballs like it still caused a knockback, and, well, this guy owns his own weapons and kept them at his house that night, so he can still stabby.
My DM gave us a meatball that we stole off a plate. We managed to germinate it into a meatball bush via druidcraft, then turned this into a multinational meatball industry, with self-sustaining meatball farms.
During a dungeon crawl, we found a cloak of many things. It only had 3 patches, 2 of which were 20-foot holes and the last of which was a ladder. I volunteered to keep it. Later on, we encountered an archmage, who was supposed to get away after the encounter, and we had absolutely crap luck against him. I decided to throw one of the 20-foot holes at him. I rolled a nat 20. And that is the story of how I defeated a level 10 archmage at 4th level.
I gave them a carpet, they used it to kill 6 people.
I gave my players an amulet that lets them speak to rocks. The one player who picked it up spent most of that session talking to his new pet rock and would often interrogate rocks they find at scenes for information, usually getting either vague info or stuff they can clearly see already, because it's a rock. Later on, another party member wanted to try talking to another rock, actually a pile of rocks made into a crude gravestone related to their character's backstory, only for the first party member to find out the amulet was cursed and they couldn't remove it. Later on they got it removed and had the amulet identified, where I revealed that the amulet only let them think they could speak to rocks, and all the information they had asked of rocks was only information that was already known to them. They basically started using the now uncursed version of the amulet as a tool to ask me for information they had forgotten or needed clarity on, but in character rather than just ask me out of character, which was great.
Healing Rock does 1d4 bludgeoning damage, but heals 1d4 plus 1 HP. It was supposed to be a funny way to bring characters back from unconsciousness by restoring a small bit of HP. Barbarians resist bludgeoning damage when raging. The healing rock became their go-to healing strategy for keeping the barbarian healed between fights.
I gave my party a stick that endlessly dripped with water. Salt water to be exact. I didn't expect them to have any use for it, but they decided, hey, you know what would be a great trap for this corrupt noble? Getting his marble floors wet at the top of the stairs. The noble ended up dead.
We acquired a brick mold along with some other basic tools when we found a workshop in a dungeon. It was supposed to just be some set dressing, but I took it anyway. We later used it and several more we made off of its design to reinforce a village that would soon come under attack. With everyone in the village making clay bricks for 2 weeks straight, we had enough of them to build a wall tall enough to make one of the ways into the town rather protected so we could focus the fighting on the other entrance where we could have more manpower at once. It saved a lot of lives since we weren't able to be flanked.
I homebrewed the hat of many hats. It's a regular hat, but it's made of shiftweave, so it can have the appearance of any other hat. It was part of a shop selling dodgy knockoffs of regular magical items, in this case, the Hat of Disguise. The halfling who always struggled with RP took it, and it became a great way to get her more involved in what her character would do. It started when she transmuted herself in "I'm with stupid" baseball cap to tease one of the other party members after he'd come up with some bullcrap plan, which led to one of the other players asking what this mysterious baseball was, and she just ran with it that it was a game they used to play back in her home region when they were kids. All of a sudden, she had a backstory, rather than just being, "I'm short and I stab things." I'm sure she would have come into RP eventually, but it was like giving her a dressing up box and seeing her realize that she could actually do things that weren't just purely mechanical.
They got a vaguely sword-shaped branch of ashwood. That was it. This was in a planescape setting. So a few hours later the sorcerer persuaded an apologetic djinn that the adjectives were unordered, so it in fact was a sword shaped like it was vaguely a branch of ashwood. To make amends for destroying part of the party's inventory, the djinn remade the sword per the sorcerer's description while under a compulsion of truth. So was born Sylvan Blade.
A spoon that turned things into food. I told them things that are not living cause. You know. But I didn't expect them to do this. They took things that had lots of value and turned them into food. It was just a bland mush, but it would be a day's ration like the berry thing. They took armor and made it food, swords, food. If it was on a dude and was tapped by the spoon, it just turned to brown mush and weakened them. Turning bosses to just normal people. So messed up.
Ha, Wand of Limpd. Had a bard, of course, that tried to nail anything with a pulse and some without. Gave it to the cleric as a kinda off button to tone him down a bit. He then proceeds to use it on the king of Cormyr, starting a succession war. Story arc destroyed.
A gray bag, that was stuck on rats. They abused it so much in one session, I created a huge rat god that came and attacked the party. It wasn't that they were overusing the item, it was that they were using it poorly. At one point pulling rats out and killing them in order to use their blood as dye.
Ring of incredible AC invulnerability, for all the a-holes picking crap apart. Meant to be a gag, gives them 1000 AC but turns them into a solid crystal statue when they put the ring on. They run into this crypt that was overrun with skeletons, meant to scare him off to remind him that they're not all powerful, and they weren't ready to face what was inside. The skeletons were crawling up this well that I described as 3 feet across. One of them jumped over the well and put the ring up, plummeting several hundred feet and killing most of the skeletons.